Hello and welcome to the Ryan Max Show. You are listening live on Facebook, YouTube, X, Twitter as they used to call it, and Rumble, if I can figure that out at some point. So today we're going to discuss the ongoing debate on bail reform and the impact it has on crime in the country. In order to have this discussion, I thought it would be best to bring in an expert in the bail industry, and that's what I've done so far today with a call out to Ken Good. He is an attorney in Texas, and he's got over 25 years of experience in the bail industry. He's been in front of the Supreme Court of Texas and the Court of Appeals, and he's also a board member on the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. So, with that, you're listening to the Ryan Max Show. All right, Ken, welcome to the Ryan Max Show. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, and a happy or Merry Christmas.
Yeah, just about a week away. So I wanted to bring you on to discuss a couple issues. The role of the bail process on the criminal justice system first, because I don't have a lot of experience in the bail industry. Obviously, I'm not in criminal justice. I'm still confused on some of the terminology surrounding it. So let's first break down the importance of the bail industry on criminal justice.
Well, for someone who doesn't understand the criminal justice system or doesn't really see how it works, let me just use this analogy. The criminal justice system is like a conveyor belt. In our big urban areas, on average, the same number of people are arrested, put on the conveyor belt to go through the criminal justice system and have their case resolved. And if they don't resolve the same number of cases this year that are added to it, then their backlog increases. And over time, their backlog gets bigger and bigger. So it's very important on the type of release we use on what's the failure to appear rate. So the bigger the failure to appear rate, the bigger the backlog, or we're going to need more courts. And then the bigger the backlog, we have more cases to get resolved. And so you want to know what the lowest failure to appear rate is, and you want to be able, what's going to keep people and hold them accountable. So of the different different release mechanisms, the private industry has by far the lowest failure to appear rate. I mean, it's not even close. So more cases get resolved, more justice gets to victims more quickly, and you can handle more cases in the same period of time. Simple release, which is what we're now using in Illinois, whether you call it zero bail, no bail, personal bonds, whatever, it's all simple release where you get released with no accountability. Those have, in some places, a 50% failure to appear rate. The private industry is less than 10%, or an 80%, like in California, misdemeanor courts has an 80% failure to appear rate. A DA agreed to that on my podcast. Then in Harris County, using a similar system for misdemeanors, there's harriscountycourtwatch.com that says on average they have over a 2-year period an 80% failure to appear rate. If you've got 1,000 people scheduled for court in 1 week, which is not uncommon in our urban areas, you can see the difference very quickly. Less than 100 people fail to show up every week versus 500 to 800 failing to show up every week. And that gets compounded over time. And so soon you can realize you're going to have double the amount of the courts to be able to resolve the same number of cases just because of the release mechanism that you're using. And the private industry bail has the lowest failure to appear rate, always has had that. And that's the reason why it's been around for 200 years. There was a mayor on a talk show recently who said that if there was an alternative to the private industry that had the same low failure to appear rate and the same level of accountability, we'd use it. But we don't. There is nothing that is an actual alternative that's comparable. And so they're not really alternatives. They're recipes for disaster, for chaos.
Well, it sounds like the current bail system might need some reforming around the country. I agree with that, but bail in general would be a deterrent, not necessarily a hindrance, right? Because despite the arguments around even Illinois, when they made the argument that poor people are getting locked up and they're just trying to get a loaf of bread or diapers for their baby, what is this argument about it's impacting poor people indiscriminately and negatively impacts them versus letting the wealthy get out because they can afford it.
Well, you know, first of all, I don't agree that there's poor people who are first time offenders stuck in jail. I don't believe there's any first time offender with no criminal history who's stuck in jail. I think these arguments are really just attacks on an easy target. Nobody's defending the bail industry. And you know what? We've had previous pushes to replace it with alternatives. There's just never been an alternative that works as well. And so I think these are just arguments to try to undermine the current criminal justice system. Because what is bail intended for? Their argument is, well, these are people who've not been held guilty. Well, that's a true comment, but that's not what bail's for. Bail is what assurance that you're going to give to the court that you're going to come back and answer your criminal charge.
Right.
And what these people are saying is, well, we shouldn't have to give any assurance because we're poor. And that's okay when it's your first offense, but after that, on your second offense or your third offense, you got a criminal history. You're not in jail because you're poor. You're in jail because you have a criminal history.
Right.
That's the problem. They don't want there to be any accountability. And when you get rid of accountability, we know now as a result of COVID, what happens? Crime goes up.
Absolutely. So with the bail argument kind of being a non-issue, because I believe that ever since Illinois became the first state to introduce this act and make it zero cash bail policy, crime has not gone down. I haven't yet to see the real statistics on it, but crime was way up even before this was a policy issue. But when a judge decides how much bail to place on somebody currently being detained, what does that process look like?
Well, okay.
Because they have some discretion, but some of these acts take away that judicial discretion.
Sure.
And so a dollar amount, when they say somebody's poor and they're being held and somebody who can pay $5,000 or $20,000 or $30,000, what does that process set up as compared to what their argument is?
Well, okay. So if a judge requires you to post a bond, say $1,000 bond, well, you can, like in Illinois, you could have posted cash for $1,000, or you could have posted a percentage of that cash to the court. Or in other states, you could go to a private bondsman and pay them a premium, like on any insurance policy, and they would post a bond which says, if we guarantee you'll show up for court, and if you don't, we'll pay the $1,000 to the court.
Right.
And so that's really the options that we have. But in Illinois, they'd already gotten rid of the private industry, years before. And so all they were left with was a cash bond and a percentage bond. And so they were really left with the worst of both worlds, because they were saying, well, we're getting rid of the private surety bondsman, so we're cutting out the middleman because they're paying the premium. But that whole argument is based on the assumption, well, they'd come to court anyway. Well, we know that for sure because of COVID, they will not come to court. When we've tried these simple release mechanisms anywhere else, they've just caused crime to increase and failures to appear to skyrocket. So we know that they will not. But the worst part, the second worst part for Illinois, is they started relying upon these cash bonds or these percentage bonds to pay for the cost of operations of the court. So they were relying upon the failures to appear to fund court operations. So they couldn't hold anybody accountable already because they needed those failures to appear to fund the court. So now they've gotten rid of that, and they don't even have the money. They didn't replace those funds. So they don't have enough money to run the courts, and their failures to appear are going up even higher. And so you're just going to have more and more chaos, and you're going to see crime increase because these are all considered green lights for criminals to commit more crime. Yeah. And as you said, you're taking away discretion. So you take away the discretion of the judges. Who can they no longer address? They can't address career criminals, organized crime, or gang members.
Yeah, there was a whole list of criminal offenses that became non-detainable now in Illinois as a result of the Safety Act being implemented.
But when they do that and they say, oh, well, we can detain the rest, they usually have a requirement to have a hearing within so many hours of arrest. Yeah. And so the DA has to decide, well, am I going to have a mini trial? They're taking the discretion away from the court, making a clear and convincing standard. And so the DA has to establish clear and convincing evidence within 3 or 4 days of arrest. And a lot of DAs don't want to show their evidence that quickly. or they don't have their evidence developed. So it's really making it impossible to hold anybody.
Right. Yeah, that seems like it's a negative way to go through. So do you have the studies and data supporting the both sides of the argument? I know we mentioned a little bit beforehand, but what studies have you come across supporting, okay, yeah, maybe this makes sense to eliminate cash bail? And what studies have you seen to show the opposite, where criminal justice advocates have said, no, this needs to stay in place?
Well, let me give you for supporting the position that the private surety bail industry has nothing comparable, and there's nothing to replace it with that doesn't create chaos and more crime. You can look at two things. Number one, you can look at a study from Yolo County, California, where the DA kept his data during COVID, and he made a comparison between individuals released on simple release or released on a private surety bond, and over 18 months, he found that people released on simple release had a 200% greater chance of committing a violent offense in the next 18 months compared to someone released on a private surety bond. I mean, who would have ever thought just something as simple as the way you release them, that would be the difference? And the other thing that I would point to is there's a lawsuit, a reported case from the 11th Circuit called Sanchez versus Alabama. And in that case, there was a county in Alabama that lived under a preliminary injunction where they were forced to use these simple release mechanisms for misdemeanors and felonies for 4 years. Crime increased, accountability ended, and then they won their lawsuit. And so it was reversed. And so they went back and implemented accountability, and then within 6 months, crime started decreasing. So, I mean, it's very clear. You arrest people, you hold them accountable.
Right.
If they don't come to court, there's a punishment or a penalty for that. Crime will decrease. And if you ask me, what is the studies that show, or what is the evidence that shows that these implementing these types of policies are good things, I would say there's nothing other than one liberal think tank issuing a report for another liberal think tank, and it's all about fairness.
Yeah.
And anytime you talk about fairness, you're going to be talking about crime increasing, because when you're saying, and let's just say, okay, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. We're going to say we need to implement policies on fairness to address the poor. That's not what the Constitution requires. The Constitution requires you have an opportunity to talk to the judge about you can't afford the bond they set. That's all the Constitution requires. But they're saying, no, you have to have a release. And so if the Constitution mandates release, then you can never hold gangs, organized crime, or career criminals accountable. And so I reject those arguments. That can't be the law, because if it is, then we're going to have chaos that cannot last, because the public will not allow it. You'll have vigilante justice if we cannot get this under control. And the Sanchez versus Alabama is the model.
So I pulled up what the Safety Act was the acronym for, just to give an idea of what the left is doing here in Illinois in order to pull this fairness game for criminals. The Safety, Accountability, Fairness, and Equity Today Act. So that's what the acronym is. So that keyword equity, that just means, oh, well, the poor people can get out free and they don't have to sit in jail, and the wealthy can pay their own ways. This whole idea that the poor can't pay their bonds, so they shouldn't be sitting in jail, is insane. Because if
absolutely, that's
down
true.
The street can't get her diapers, maybe she should ask a family member rather than trying to steal them.
Well, but if her bond's at $1,000 and she can't afford it, the Constitution requires a hearing for her to go to the judge, and the judge can lower it to $1.
Right.
The judge can set it at $50. If it's her first time offense, that's what's happening, or they're just being released.
Yeah.
But if you are then going before the judge and you have a substantial criminal history, you're not in jail because you're poor. You're in jail because you have a criminal history, and they don't agree with that. They say, well, it's still. I was on a debate with someone from the hard left pushing these policies. And I promise you, if they had to pick between a citizen in that community or a murderer, well, they would say, I'm feeling your pain, but this murderer, you can't hold him in jail. Well, I can feel my pain all you want, but I want to feel safe.
Yeah. it doesn't make any sense. First of all, she's not going to be spending a night in jail and $5,000 for simple petty theft of diapers. She's not going to be doing it, and that's not happening. And no one's arresting anybody for stolen diapers.
That's right. That's the biggest problem.
That was the argument that JB had, is that, on the campaign trail during his reelection, he made that argument for this act, and everybody came out against him and said, no, that's not happening. You're lying, and it's being deceitful to what your policy is going for. So I don't understand the argument. And now you have, I think New Jersey is also substantial bail reform as well. I don't think they've completely gone like Illinois, but they're another state that has come close.
Well, they have gotten rid of their private surety bail industry, and they replaced it with a statewide pretrial services department. And it's been so expensive that it's, they've had to do at least one, maybe two tax increases just to fund the pretrial services department.
Imagine that.
And I know. Imagine that. I mean, and it was being done better with no expense to the taxpayers before these changes. And what they changed to was a release or detain system in New Jersey. They enacted a broad cite and release, so they really couldn't hold anybody. And then again, if you're going to hold somebody, you have to have a mini trial within 3 or 4 days of arrest with a clear and convincing evidence standard, which makes it very difficult to hold anybody, which is one of the reasons why even the Democrats are pushing for rolling back the New Jersey plan, because crime is increasing even there. And you know what? They were pushing that in New Jersey because of supposed inequity in the detention of minorities in the jails. The jails are still made up of the same different minority groups to the same percentages. So this whole system that they've enacted at great expense has had no difference on that.
Yeah, it's no impact. So it's just amazing that they continue to push policies that have little to no impact, or makes it worse for minority communities that are still impacted on these crimes and these offenses.
Oh, that's probably the best point, is who are they hurting the most? These very communities, because as crime goes up, they're going to go up faster in our minority communities. Because, I mean, just look at the statistic on murder in the United States. The victims of murder, the people who are being murdered, are 50% young black males. Well, who's the one doing the murder? It's by and large young black males. And so for some reason, we're taking the side of the murderer over the victim.
I don't understand. They keep voting for these policies. They keep voting for implementing these policies when the politicians make these pleas. So I got a comment. All I see is controlled intentional chaos by the left to garnish more votes from the Dems to keep them happy for their base. And in fact, the left wants this more control of citizens in some ways. Fear is a hell of a thing to settle. Fear mongering for sure. When they push fear the little guy, it's all about the poor people. They're the ones impacted by these policies. And yet, who's hurting the most as a result of these policies? It's the poor people, or the ones who can't get out of their own way. It's a nightmare, and I don't know where it stops, because Illinois became the first state. California's already got some reform going, and like we said, New Jersey's got their own. New York has been a nightmare. So I've got, let's go one more thing, and then we'll get into the Wire Points article that I found. So possible alternatives and compromises that may be kind of a gap between these policies and these viewpoints. What do you think?
Oh, okay. So what are the compromises? Okay, so
if you have to get away from some form of bail and go to an in between where you have I don't know, some way of detaining people, where's the go between? Where's the compromise?
There's not. The problem is on this area of the law, you can't compromise when you can't agree on the facts. I mean, usually, I'm an attorney, so usually we agree on the facts because, we always say the facts are the facts. You disagree on how the law applies to the facts. Here, we can't even agree on the facts. I mean, is crime increasing? Well, I would say it's not even up for debate. But if you would go to the left, they'd say, well, crime is not really increasing. It's just a perception that crime is increasing. Crime's really going down, and you're a racist for even saying that crime is going up. So it's hard to really find common ground when you can't even agree on the facts. And, what's the alternative? I go back to what the mayors have started saying. Until you have an alternative that has the same low accountability same high accountability, same low failure to appear rate, you don't have an alternative. And all of the things that we're talking about, the Vera Institute, all the alternatives, the Vera Institute said, well, you're going to have at least a 40% failure to appear rate, and that should be okay. A 40% failure to appear rate causes the criminal justice system to collapse.
Yeah.
You can't have that. I mean, we say in the industry, if you have a higher than 10% failure to appear rate, you're going out of business because you're going to have a substantial number of losses. They're trying to say 40%, 50% is okay. I mean, you would have to double your courts.
Yeah.
And, we're looking to save money, not spend more. Right. That's why the New Jersey plan has never been proposed anywhere else, because it's expensive. You don't see the DC model offered because it's expensive. People are looking for just simple release because it doesn't cost anything. And that's what's causing crime to go up. And our politicians know it. They're in a box because of the last comment. They got people out to vote, support them, and got elected.
Yeah, they got the vote.
Now they're in a box because now they can't fix it because their voters won't support it.
Yeah. You had here in Illinois, I think 100 out of the 102 attorneys across the state oppose the Safety Act. And the only two that didn't, one of them was Kim Fox, I believe, out of Cook County. And the other one, I think it was Lake County. They're the only ones that actually supported it. And they sued and tried to get it out of the courts. And parts of it became unconstitutional when they implemented it. And then the Supreme Court took it at the state level and decided that everything was fine. But they added all these amendments to it to kind of try to clean it up, but it really didn't do anything. It cushioned some of it, but you've got 4 different class of misdemeanors now that are not detainable. Mm-hmm. You've got multiple felonies, I think included battery and some other very violent crimes that are no longer detainable in Illinois under this policy.
You would think it would be unconstitutional because it's the legislature telling the courts what to do, and that'd be a violation of separation of states or separation of powers. But when the Safety Act was going through the system, we kept hearing, oh, it's going to be held unconstitutional. It's going to be held unconstitutional. But I'm going to tell you, I didn't think there was ever a chance it was going to be held unconstitutional because Illinois is so political.
Yeah. I mean, you've got 5-2 on most cases. When you got 2 conservative.
What do you think the judges are going to, they're saying, look at the mess you've created. You want us to fix it?
Yeah.
No, you fix it. You created this mess. So I really think they held it constitutional to throw it back to the judiciary to fix.
Yeah, and the argument was legislatures have the power to change laws in the courts, and the argument was conservatives are just trying to expand the judicial review and the power of the judicial branch.
But if you looked at their analysis, I'm an appellate attorney by heart, and so if you looked at what their reasoning was, they were wrong. But the problem is they have the final say, so wrong was right.
Right.
So you have to figure out, why did they say that? And I think it was all politics. They're just like, don't put us. We have to get elected too. Don't put this in our basket. You go fix it.
Yeah,
you created it.
You have 2 justices on the state Supreme Court here in Illinois that received each $1 million from J.B. Pritzker during their campaigns, and they can tell you square in the face that yes, I can rule this clean as day, and I'm not impacted at all. So that's where it goes. There was one more thing I think before we get to the wire points. When I think this is in some notes I had, but. And I don't know how recent this was, a CNN story about the former Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence and Counterterrorism. There was a National Retail Federation survey conducted, and 81% felt that retail crime had grown more violent than the previous year. And so this was noted that Target, which had closed stores in New York City, Portland, and Los Angeles, all of which had major bail reform in the recent years. So when you're seeing numbers like 81% felt that crime had gone up since the implementation of these bail reforms, what does that tell you? That people are seeing the writing on the wall, that bail reform, while maybe you can make an argument that it needs to be happening, but not at the rate that they're doing it. You can't just eliminate bail altogether.
Well, we're always looking to improve. And so I would disagree that we need to replace or change. We just always need to look to improve. But the problem is, so why does bail reform cause all this shoplifting to take place? Well, because our jails become suddenly full with very dangerous people. And so there's no room at the end. There's no room for baby Jesus. There's no room for anybody in the county jail. So when people stop showing up on misdemeanor theft, well, they go, okay, we don't have room for them. So we're not willing to build another jail. So we're just going to quit holding them accountable. When we get them back, we're just going to release them again. They see that as a green light to commit more crime. So that's the reason why you see shoplifting going through the roof. And then you've got organized crime gangs and career criminals stepping into that void and going, you know what? I can make a killing on this. through Amazon Marketplace or Facebook Marketplace, or I can get all this shoplifting stuff, pay pennies on the dollar to people who rush in and grab it, and then I can sell it and make good money.
Yeah. It is insane how much of a business these career criminals can make off of these policies.
Well, and we're told that this is all political now. It's a left versus right issue. Public safety is not a left or a right
issue. It's never been a political issue. No. It's a safety issue. And I agree.
Look at Alabama, Sanchez versus Alabama. You re-implement accountability, crime will go down.
Yeah. Yeah. Look what Giuliani did in New York. Broken glass, broken windows policies. Yeah. You break a window, you're going to be held accountable. And that deterred a lot of more serious crimes. When you stop and frisk, when you break the break a window policy, you have to hold people accountable. Otherwise, they're going to continue to do more crime.
Those are known theories to use in criminal justice. I mean, it's things that we teach in our colleges if you have a criminal justice degree, and somehow it became something that we needed to attack and say it was wrong. And really it was just an attack on the criminal justice system. We know what works, but now we've been through this period of years where we're attacking what works, and this is the result. And I would say this is what they wanted, but it's not sustainable. All these places that have tried these, look at New York. How many times have they rolled back? 3 or 4 times they've rolled back criminal justice reform, and they're going to do it some more because crime is still increasing. So you've got places where they're rolling back. California tried to do a statewide policy. It was put up for referendum and it was voted down. And so LA's trying to do it on their own. These things may actually cause the country to go further to the right, because we're just we are repeating a cycle from the 60s where we felt safe. So we were more forgiving on our laws. More people were released from prison. Crime started going up. People started fighting, putting more restrictions on them, holding them accountable. So it got worse, and we had this backlash. We elected Ronald Reagan as president, and we had a major crime bill. It sure sounds like we're repeating all the mistakes of the 60s.
Yeah. And not to mention the war on drugs and the
the war on drugs. The war on drugs just makes me so mad, because there's so many things that are similar to criminal justice and bail reform, but we're giving up on people. We're saying, we're going to decriminalize all these hard drugs in Portland, and we're going to offer them training. They're having record overdoses every month because no one's less than 1%. 0.01% is going to get any type of help, and instead they're just going to be over, and we're just watching it. I mean, you've got to have accountability to say you're going to go to prison or you're going to go to rehab.
We're handing out safe drug use kits instead of getting them treatment, and instead of criminalizing illegal drugs and making it harder to get them. We just decided, you know what? You do you. If you're going to die, you're going to die.
Well, who does that hurt the worst? It hurts our poor community. Because, I had a sister who died, but she had a 30-year prescription drug addiction following a car accident. And the jails are poor men's drug rehab.
Right.
And so now when we're saying we will not hold anybody, the only people that can go to rehab are rich people, because everybody else is saying no, and they're overdosing, and it is the biggest travesty, and it's just awful. And I kind of want to know how many people are making money hand over fist out of our government for these programs that they said that they're spending money on that nobody's taking advantage of.
Of course.
And we're just watching people die as they do it.
Yeah, it's amazing. Okay, so wirepoints.org, they are kind of an Illinois watchdog organization. They kind of they write out articles, they investigate government wrongdoings and things. They're a pretty good, credible source for inside the Illinois government. And there was a University of Cincinnati professor, John Paul Wright. He wrote some takeaways on the Safety Act and bail reform in Chicago as a whole. And this was from the Manhattan Institute. And he argues that the criminal justice system reformers who backed bail changes in Cook County and the Safety Act have ignored the impacts of lower income communities, like we mentioned earlier, and the costs of crime are borne on the backs of individuals, families, and businesses that often occupy least privileged neighborhoods in society. Then he goes on to talk about Cook County, which has already paid the price since 2017. Chief Judge Timothy Evans, up until November this year, there have been 87 alleged victims of people facing trial in Chicago just for top tier violent crime or weapons felonies who were out on bail under those relaxed policies instituted. And then in 2017, this was before the Safety Act. And this includes 49 alleged victims of killings, shootings, or attempts to kill them or shoot them. More than 15,000 crimes of all sorts have been committed by Cook County pretrial defendants since they've been out on bail. And the amount is probably lowballed since you can't account for all the crimes that can reported. And
or there's so much crime not reported now.
Yeah, and arrest rates in Chicago have been so low. But he also issued a brief talking about bail reform in Cook County as an unsolving crime problem, and that the act end of cash bail and his limited pretrial detention will worsen crime victimizations, and particularly for at-risk communities that can stand it the least. We talked about earlier who gets impacted by this the most. The poor people that you said would be better
that you're trying to help.
No bail. Yeah. So
well, but I like to say, look at the murder, the murderers that are out on bail. I mean, it's almost like you get one free murder before we're going to hold you in jail. I mean, it's like you get one free bite as a dog. You get one free murder before we're going to hold you without bail. I mean, we used to never have that. If you're charged with murder, you had to stay in jail until your case was resolved.
Yeah,
not anymore.
So then the left also ignores these other issues we know have been problems in these communities as well. You have K-12 public education that is failing. You have over 90% of Black students in those schools under proficiency in reading and math. You have unmarried mothers. Out of 4 of every 5 Black children are born. And so those are family issues that don't take into account the impacts they have on crime that continues to happen. So the problem stems from you have unmarried kids out of everywhere in these low income communities, and then they have no fathers, no connected families, no one to hold them accountable except for the government, and the government doesn't want to do that because they keep handing them out everything they can. And then when they have no more handouts, what do? They resort to committing crimes. And then since they can't pay bail, they no longer have to pay bail. They're out again, and now they get more emboldened because they can continue to do it.
Absolutely right. And, there was a study from Minnesota that I highlighted on our podcast recently talking about is the Minnesota criminal justice system systemically racist? And so he used statistics because in 2022, they started reporting the race of the people that were reporting the crime, and at the initial level, what was the race of the person who was the suspect. And they found that we have a disproportionate amount of crime being committed in those minority communities. And so until you're willing to address why we have a disproportionate amount of crime being committed by those communities, then you're ignoring the fact that these policies will actually do, like we've already said, much more harm to those very communities than what you're saying you're going to do. You're saying it's to help them, when these will actually do the opposite. It will make it much worse.
Yeah. So Wright has a few takeaways, and I'm going to go over them real quick. There's a couple more studies, and then there are some more stats. We can break those down too. So his takeaway from this was that bail reformers founded on a myth, and that cash bail is an important deterrent. Do you agree that cash bail is a very important deterrent and overall?
Absolutely. But I would say, let's talk about which is which. We're not talking about cash bonds. I think the private industry bail system is the biggest deterrent, and cash bonds are a little better, but because simple release is so bad, but they're all on a spectrum. Cash bonds are okay, but the private industry bail system is the best. It has the lowest failure to appear rate and the highest level of accountability. And so y'all got rid of that years before you got rid of cash bonds. And so you made your system even worse.
Yeah. I don't understand why the need to get rid of private industry. I mean, you would think you would want more income coming into the government.
True, but the argument that they were making was, well, we're just cutting out the middleman, which is assuming that the private industry doesn't do anything but take your money and release you from jail, which we know now that's absolutely not true.
I mean, the government.
But it's absolutely not true. We're the grease that keeps the conveyor belt of the criminal justice system running, and y'all got rid of the grease years before you got rid of the Safety Act, or you passed the Safety Act.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a study out of New York City, cash bail payment timeframes for defendants. He notes that of those who were arrested by New York City police in 2018 had bail set, 13% made bail on their first court appearance. of the 87 remaining, 45% would make bail within 2 days. 70% would within 7 days, and almost 90% within the 30 days. The Safety Act, I think, put a limit on 90 days for detention. I think at some point one of their amendments might have changed it where they had no longer needed that restriction. But you see right off the bat, even in New York City, they're making bail. So I don't understand their argument where they say, well, they can't because they're poor. Almost 90% within a month are making their bail of some form. So
Well, and
the
their
right
argument
there shows it's flawed.
But their argument is, well, any day they're in jail is costing the county more money, and it's so
Oh, yeah.
much times day, and then that's how much it's costing the county. But I think from this litigation we've seen, like in Sanchez versus Alabama, you can look at California. If you don't hold anybody, you're saving that little penny, those pennies per day, but you're spending so much money on losing businesses from record shoplifting
Yeah.
and businesses closing, and
Right.
your people don't have anywhere to shop. I mean, which is cheaper? I know which
Right.
one I pick. I pick the
Yeah.
pennies a day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a vicious circle of if you keep these people out of society, there
Mhm.
you actually can deter that and make it easier to guard against these things becoming a problem.
Well, that's the whole principle of our prison system is there
Yeah.
are people, our public safety is so important that there are people that have shown that they are not going to conform to a public safety model. So we're going to put them away in a prison.
Yeah, it's amazing. So there was also a Federal Bureau of Justice stats report that he put out, which found that 75 and largest U.S. counties from 1990 to 2004, only 6% of defendants were held without bail. Of those released, 45% were released within 1 day, 76 released within a week, and 92 within a month. So he concludes basically is that contrary to the reformers' claims, pretrial detainees are not held simply because they are poor and cannot make bail. So we talked about it. They're not being held because they're poor. They're being held because they've committed crimes or multiple crimes, and that's why.
Well, and I've highlighted a study on my podcast where what is the reason why people languish in jail, and what there's a social scientist and I can't remember his name, but his conclusion in his study was criminal history is the number one reason why people languish in jail, not poverty.
Yeah, yeah. Whether you have 5,000 or $1 or $10 or 30,000 or $1 million bond, you're in jail because you've committed a crime. And to make sure that you appear for your crime, that's the one key they have. You remove that, they have to now release you, and there's no assurance that they can hold you and hold you accountable.
Well, at the very least, you're held on a probable cause affidavit.
Right.
So you've been arrested because someone signed an affidavit and a judge reviewed it and said there was probable cause to arrest you. So you were arrested pursuant to a probable cause warrant. That requires you to give assurance to the court that you will return to respond to the charges.
Yeah. There's so many ways of keeping them off the streets and ensuring that they make their trials and absolutely confirm that's the only piece they have. Why would you remove that? It doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely. And it's, when I started down this road of criminal justice reform and studying these issues, it just didn't make sense when you say, so we're not going to give them a surety bond and that's going to somehow cause chaos. It makes so much sense today. Once you fill up your jail with all the really dangerous people because you've given them all a green light to commit more crime. Well, what are you going to do with the low level of the misdemeanor offenses if they decide to thumb their nose at the system? You can't do anything unless you're willing to build more jails. But if you were willing to build more jails, you'd hold people accountable. You wouldn't have this problem to begin with.
Yeah. Overwhelmingly, the ones who voted for this act in Illinois have been main policymakers in the Black Freedom Caucus. So there's where your advocates are for criminal justice reform, because most of their community are in jail. So they feel it obligated to help
it's
them.
the mayors of those communities that are now coming up and saying, we've got to stop this. The NAACP in Oakland came out with a letter attacking all the local elected officials and demanding a state of emergency on crime. That was the last 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
So you're seeing it turn, and it's going to come from the mayors, because when you go to San Francisco and they're selling commercial buildings at 30%, 40%, 50% of their value from a year ago,
Yeah.
the mayors see where this is going. They're going to see defaults. They're going to not be able to pay all the stuff that they're paying. They're going to have to default themselves. So they're sounding the alarm, and just nobody's responding yet, but they will.
Yeah. I don't understand. It's an issue that I don't think is going to go away, especially when you see extreme leftist states seeing what Illinois has done and say, well, if they can get away with it, then we might as well try it. I don't know how many states actually have private bond versus cash bond.
The vast majority still have private surety bonds, but as long as we have the left saying, "Oh, we don't have crime's not increasing," it's just a perception problem. Then we're gonna. I mean, once we all agree on the facts, then we're going to have a turn. But right now, we don't have an agreement. We have we have this whole crap argument saying, "Oh, crime's not really increasing." I mean, you can believe your lying eyes here. Your lying eyes are telling you the truth. Crime is increasing. Shoplifting is at record numbers, and you've got people committing. I mean, the reason why they're saying that is we no longer count some crimes as crimes because we're decriminalizing them, and that's what they're playing monkey wrench with the statistics.
Look, crime is on the down low. It's ending. Well, it's because you just decriminalize half the offenses that were detainable. That were actual crimes.
We're still less safe.
Yeah, we're still less safe, but that's okay. And when you look at the example in San Francisco, where the governor came out and basically said, "Yeah, we cleaned up the streets just for the Chinese dictator that came to town, but we don't do it any other time."
The Nancy Pelosi Federal Building in San Francisco, they came out and told all their employees work from home. It's not safe enough to park your car and walk into the building, so work from home for the foreseeable future.
It is insane. So I'm not as familiar in Texas with what goes on. I know Texas is far better than Illinois. I know legislatively they've had some issues because they've got a rhino Speaker of the House down there that has thrown a wrench into some of the legislation. Do you see at any point Texas having issues with some of their criminal justice system down there?
Not from the legislative standpoint. The Texas legislature passed SB 6 2 sessions ago, which strengthened the criminal justice system and limited the use of simple release for a lot of violent offenses. Used to, the trial court could do it, but not the magistrate. So like in our urban areas, they're judges who all they do is set bail all day long. They couldn't grant a personal bond for those offenses, but the trial court could. Now they're not eligible for a personal bond for those offenses. But we've got a problem in Harris County. Harris County is the third largest county in the country. And they have a federal lawsuit where they entered into a settlement where they're using a lot of these policies for misdemeanors. And even though that case has now been reversed 6 or 7 times, they're still following the settlement until somebody decides to go in and ask the court to vacate it, since the Court of Appeals held that it should have never even been filed. And so until that's being done, but it's all political at this point. So in Harris County, the politics are overshadowing the reality in public safety. People say they want to feel safe, but they're not willing to do anything about it. And until the public starts holding them accountable for their lack of accountability in the criminal justice system, it's going to be hard. And I would kind of add to that. Identity politics is making it very difficult to do that, because when you have the far left saying your identity is such so you can never vote for Republican, they'll just do whatever they want. So you're going to have to finally say, I'm going to hold you accountable till you change on this issue, and then I'll start looking at the other. Once that happens, it'll change overnight. Promise you.
Yeah. So Harris County, what largest city is in Harris County? Houston. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. So that, I guess that can pose a problem. Okay.
Well, can you imagine what happens when you have 80% failure to appear rate in your misdemeanor courts? It's the same thing you're having in California.
Okay. So random question. I don't know how much you've worked with it. So with the problems of the border and the problem with illegal immigration, just opening the floodgates with this administration, what impact has that had on the system down there? And what does that do to the bail industry and in general?
Well, I think there's substantial overlap on those two issues, because a lot of the factors are the same. You've got people who are saying, "Oh, well, we don't have a problem with immigration. We don't have a problem with our borders. Our borders are secure," and they're just looking the other way. And same thing with criminal justice reform, the bad bail policies. Oh, that's not a problem. No, we don't have a policy. Crime's going down. Haven't you looked at this little thing that we've been, cherry picking? And I mean, come on. And they're just trying to get to the next election. What you're seeing is the poll numbers are really starting to kill the left on the issue of immigration.
Mhm.
There was a trial balloon in the last week where the president was saying, well, he would be comfortable with addressing these three things at the border
Mhm.
as a deal so they could do, the funding bill for the Russia war that's ongoing. And the Democrats came out and immediately said, if you were to do that, you would lose support with the Democrats. And so that's an internal push. Well, that same
Right.
thing's happening on crime.
Yeah.
And so that's a recipe for disaster, I believe, because when you've got the NAACP in Oakland saying crime needs to have a state of emergency, they can't really say crime's not really a problem. The
Right.
right is lying to you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you're going to see that. And so now we're getting it to the border.
Mhm.
And so they're not going to be able to lie anymore. And, they can say all they want. We feel your pain, but they won't do anything about it. There's going to be hell to pay, punishment for their lack of action. And I think, when Obama comes out, I think today he came out and said, oh, I think that Biden could lose this election, and it's scaring a lot of Democrats. There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
It's because of his stance on the border and his stance on crime, and I think his stance on Israel is killing him right now, because it's showing
Yeah.
that coalition is very destructive to the
Mhm.
country.
Yeah.
And that coalition is made of people who want to open border and who want criminal justice reform that doesn't hold anybody accountable.
Right.
And when the public sees that, they're done.
Yeah. Yeah. His stance on Israel and the nature in which he hasn't been real strong in support. He's kind of just let them.
But he can't. He
Yeah.
can't. He's with what little
Yeah.
he's done. There's been some Muslim groups that have come
Yeah.
out and said they are going to try actively to defeat him. And what they're counting on is they'll never vote for Republican. They'll just stay home. But that coalition can't stand when you take one of those three legs away.
Yeah. So reminding me of the border issue, reminded me of a story the other day. With the increase of IEDs possible at the border coming over, how worried are you that Texas can't even continue to hold up on their end and keep out some of these dangerous things? This is the federal government's responsibility, and yet you have one of the largest states doing everything they can to stop it, and the spill is still happening. Now you have people bringing in IEDs across the border.
Very, very worried. Absolutely worried. I mean, I was on a panel, or I moderated a panel of sheriffs from the border counties talking about what they're dealing with. And, thank God, Governor Abbott started shipping people to other states, because, someone predicted that when he started doing that, their stance on immigration reform would change. And what do you know? It did. So when you took the problem to the quote unquote open border cities or
Mhm.
sanctuary cities that really weren't, they were just doing it in name only.
Mhm.
Once you bring them to them, they're like, oh my God, what have you done? We don't want these people here. I mean, it's like, come on.
Yeah, now you see New York's mayor crying out, saying we've got too many immigrants in our city. Meanwhile, he was the biggest opening border
Yeah.
proponent in the country. Oh man. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there any other topics you want to discuss or anything else you want to add to it?
Well, I would say if people want more information about my organization, you can go to pbtx.com, which is our website.
Yeah, there we go.
You can also look at our blog, where we highlight important stories in the news. But we also have our own podcast called The Bell Post. It's linked on our menu, or you can go to thebellpost.com and you can hear criminal justice issues. That's what we highlight. Just if you want to know what the New Jersey plan is, we have a podcast that talks about the New Jersey plan. And so we just want to highlight, we want to educate the public and politicians on these very important issues, because what we discovered when I started looking at these issues is no one else is telling the truth. They all have their own agenda. They're all lying they're cooking the books. And so if we're not out there telling the truth, being a resource to our elected officials, then they have no resource. When you have politicians or you have advocates taking the Harris County model, which is a complete failure, has an 80% failure to appear rate, and taking it to Ohio and saying that's the model for the rest of the country. And they won't even acknowledge that the case that's based on has been reversed 6 times. You got a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, sir, for coming on and chatting. I'm sure we'll be back in the future if any other cases that come up.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, see ya.